ידיד נפש הרחמן משוחרתך אל רצונך משוחרתך אל רצונך ירוץ עבדך כמו הים ישתחווה אל מול הדרך יערב לו ידידותיך יערב לו ידידותיך יערב לו ידידותיך מנופס צור בכל טעם הדור נאה ציב העולם נפשי חולה רפנה בהרות לה נועם צבחה אז תתחזק ותתרפא אז תתחזק ותתרפא והייתה לה שמחת עולם והייתה לה שפחת עולם והייתה לה שפחת עולם ותיק יהמו רחמך בחוסנה הבן אוהבך ותיק יהמו רחמך בחוסנה הבן אוהבך כי זה כמה ניספתי לראות בתפארת עוזך אנא אלי מחנת ליבי חושנה ואל תתעלם בחושנה Shana Igalana, Igalana, ufro, sufro, apivala, Esukai, Shome, Ha. Tahirets mikodecha, Tahirets mikodecha, Nahakila v'nismachabach, Nahakila v'nismachabach, Maher ahuv kiva moed, Kiva moed, Kiva moed, Maher ahuv kiva moed, Kiva moed, V'chaneinu, 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 Ki me'olam, V'chaneinu, V'chaneinu, Ki me'olam.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar. Binoteshe yarbitzeni, Al mei menuchot yinaleini. Nafshi yeshovei v'yancheni, Magle tzedek leman shmo, Gam ki elech b'geitz ha'mavet, Lo irara. Ki ata imadi, Shivtecha mishantecha, Heima yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai, Shulchan neged zorerai. Dishan tabashem en roshi, Kosi levaya. Ach tov achesed yirdefuni, Kol yemei chayai. Shavti beveit Adonai leorech yamin. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. I usually try to find some of those words, either in the Hebrew or in the English, that resonate, that vibrate in the way that our loved one would find meaningful. But for Perry, those aren't the words that I think vibrated the most with his spirit. Yedid Nefesh, that his daughter just sang, a melody that I had just heard because he recorded it and sent it as a wave file. So I heard his voice singing it. The words, if you're unfamiliar, talk about a beloved soulmate. Yearning for days that we remember, they might not actually ever have been precisely the way that we yearn for them, but we say, V'choneni ki me'olam, love me well, just like it used to be. You know Perry. And I know Perry. And there have been too many moments in his life that would cause him to call out those words. Chaneni. A little bit of grace would be nice. There are other words in Yedid Nefesh. Maher Ahuv, sung quickly over and over. Quickly, beloved. Now. Now is the time. And in our lives, now is not the time that we were hoping for. Now is not the time that Perry and Malka were hoping for. And so what we're going to do as people who love Perry very much is we're going to do a little bit of singing as much as we can. But those melodies are going to be melodies that he is singing through us. I had this bizarre image, because I don't think he ever would have done it, of him dancing a pirouette during Yedid Nefesh just now. And I don't know what that means, but there is some dance that he is doing right now. We just have to imagine it happening. And so as we share our memories, our pain, our sadness, recognizing that that's what we've come to do and that's not all there is to do, is going to be a strange dance for us to figure out together. So we'll have to sing as much as we can. We can choose songs very carefully. I could keep on saying words from Yedid Nefesh that I think Perry would have us focus on, because every word is a word worth focusing on, and he would have taken a lot of time focusing on each one of them. So we'll have time. I'm going to call upon Diane and Tamir, each in turn, to share their thoughts.
Once upon a time, many, many years ago, a little boy stood on a train platform in The Hague, Den Haag, in Holland. And he was standing there with his mother, and his mother had told him they were going off to visit an aunt in Amsterdam. This little boy was very intelligent and very observant, and as the train pulled into the platform, he looked at it and he said, "But Mama, this is not the train that goes to Amsterdam." And she looked at him. She was my grandmother. I know that look. She looked at him and she said, "Shh." Hustled him into the train. The doors closed and the train pulled away from the platform. And that was the last he ever saw of his childhood and of the 14 members of his family who perished in the Shoah. That was a decisive moment for him, and one that he never forgot.
In the years that preceded that, Perry had a great relationship with his father. He spoke about him often. His father adored him, and seeing the intelligence in little Perry, he started him in with a Yiddish tutor even before school. Yiddish was Perry's first language. Perry told us that his father would go about his daily routine. He would sing beautifully, and he was full of stories, he was full of jokes. And the apple didn't fall far from the tree in this respect. His family owned a successful factory in The Hague. He had a large extended family that lived close by, and from his stories and the few remaining photographs, you had a sense of frequent family gatherings, of large meals, stylish clothing, and table service. And while the family was close by Perry's home, it was between two red light districts. And when they would pass, Chaim, his father, would tell Perry to lower his eyes and keep them down. You can be sure Perry found a way to steal a look here or there. He spoke fondly of his grandmother Rose, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles. The stories leave the impression of a warm, extended family filled with love, good humor, numerous occasions to enjoy both.
we actually owe our lives, Perry and I, and all of our immediate family, we owe our lives to a mean Nazi. When Holland fell, only took 9 days. Holland had been neutral in the First World War. People thought it would be neutral in the Second World War. Didn't make much difference to Herr Hitler. He marched in, and in 9 days, that was it. And Perry remembers the day he just cried and cried and cried, listening to the Queen on the radio saying that the armies had abdicated then to the Germans. And he felt like nothing could protect him. But fortunately, a Dutch Nazi was awarded with service to the Third Reich by being given the Scheinok family factory. And he was mean. Now, there were other business people whose businesses were also taken over. The Nazis weren't, in those cases, perhaps not so mean, but we were fortunate this man was mean. He was mean-spirited. He said, I'm going to kill you all. You have no idea what horrors await you. And they started to think, okay, what horrors do await us? And my grandmother niggled. She niggled and said, Chaim, we've got to leave, we've got to leave. Fortunately, my grandfather had been a soldier in the Austro-Hungarian army in the First World War. Apparently he had been caught davening at the wrong time. One of his superiors beat him within a fraction of his life. And when his regiment was sent off, he was in a hospital recovering. And when he recovered enough, he did not march on to find his regiment, but walked for 8 months from where they were stationed to Holland. And that kind of courage was what allowed him then to find the false papers, find a smuggler. It was my cousin's grandparents, right? Yeah. Eddie and Annie. Eddie, who then with Chaim, with my grandfather, found just the right smugglers to take them first, and then find a route through Holland and through France. And the family was eventually united in Nice. And then through a series of events, many close calls, extraordinary stories, which are too numerous perhaps to share here, they did eventually make their way to Lisbon, and then took a boat to this country and sailed into Baltimore. And then my father grew up in New York City on 96th and Central Park West, right in the center of the city. There are many, many things that we could share about his becoming an American, becoming an adult. The main thing that stands out for me as his daughter is that he was a human being of extraordinary contradictions and complexities. And just the way he looked at these critical experiences of just there, he would say two diametrically opposed statements. The one was, the Nazis stole my life. The other was, I've been given 71 years as a gift. And those 71 years are the years past that time on the train platform, the years when he could have perished in the Shoah and didn't, and lived an extraordinary life, lived a life of love, lived a life of beauty. He loved the arts. He was a scholar. He had many, many feathers, many strings to his bow, many, many things he could do. But there was some thing that was just always haunting him. It haunted his sleep. He never slept well. And he would describe himself as a man who saw the glass as half empty and not half full. And that was the man whose post-traumatic stress certainly colored my childhood and much of my early adulthood, but that's not the man who passed away on Sunday morning. And we hope that in these next few contributions we can take you with us on that journey a little bit that will help bring you up to date on what was really happening inside Perry and what's happened in our relationships.
There's so many things that I remember about Perry growing up. He was a big personality. He had a long life. I can only begin to tell them, and I'll start with 4 today. Despite being an accomplished curmudgeon, it was clear that Perry loved life. He had a big laugh, and when a joke was particularly good, he would hoot like no one else I know.
Hoo-ha!
He laughed often, and he laughed just as hard, maybe harder, if the joke was about him. He most definitely did not take himself too seriously. And I would often joke with my mom after he was telling a joke or a story. That was number 227, pretending we had cataloged all of his jokes and stories. The second is about my home, and that it was a real blessing to grow up in a home where my father adored my mother so much. And the love that he had wasn't blind. He picked a partner that challenged him to be a better man. And as you know, my mother is no wilting lily, so that challenge was real. And when Perry and I first met over 40 years ago, he was a scary, short-tempered, impatient man. And in his later years, he was affectionate, he was warm. Safta still had a little bit of work to do on the impatience, but no one's perfect. The third is the way that Perry chronicled his family story. And he did what the older generation, he was a 9-year-old boy, and he did what the older generation wasn't able to do. And in 1996, he assembled the family at Yad Vashem to dedicate a plaque to memorialize the 14 members of the family that stayed behind in the Shoah and died. He called it 14 Yellow Roses, the ceremony. And it was remarkable that a 9-year-old boy as an adult would have the courage to shed light on the details of the family that had been murdered, on which days, in which camps, to shape out their final days and to confront the horror, and to design a memorial service to heal, to think about their lives 50 years later. He made sure that we had a video of the service, and we have it on YouTube. The last I'll share today is about Shabbat dinner. Growing up, we rarely missed Friday nights together as a family. My mom would light the candles. We stood as Perry sang the Kiddush. And he sang it in a beautiful melody that I haven't heard in other homes, and that melody is rooted deep, deep within me. And as kids, even with company joining, we were encouraged to talk about our lives, to share our experiences, to talk about our views about current events. I wonder if it was a little like Perry's experience growing up himself. More recently, as an adult, it was very sweet how Perry would always offer me. He would always pour me a glass of wine, the wine that he knew that I liked. He was so happy when we came to Shabbat on Fridays, and he would brighten up when Mimi, Davi, and Junmi would come, and especially when Barb would join us.
A man of complexities and contradictions. I feel particularly grateful to my father for the gift of music. The melody that you heard of Yedid Nefesh was a melody that his father had sung to him, had sung every day of his life. And I think Perry really saw himself as part of a stream of history And that's why that experience that he brought together with the family at Yad Vashem was so significant for him. There are some things that I know he really regretted. He really regretted not finding out from his father what that long journey was between Austria and Holland that took 8 months. He regrets not having asked him. He wishes he had those stories. But he really wanted to have Did Nefesh memorialized, immortalized. And so that setting was of his father's melody, and then set with violin, cello, piano, and then voice. Music and laughter are signs of his presence. That's absolutely for sure. And I think so many of the jokes that he told were jokes where you're actually smiling through the tears. I think that's probably part of Jewish humor anyway, Yiddish humor in general. It's not just an exuberant, joyful laughing because life is so wonderful, but there's something that pinches, there's something that hurts, and the laughter is a way of finding one's balance again, being able to see that other part of what's in the glass, being able to see that maybe even in the negative space of what's not there, there are extraordinary joys. I would like to acknowledge in particular Malka, Safta, as an extraordinary civilizing force in Perry's life. I think if I can just make a public acknowledgement, thank you so much for turning my father into more of a mensch, the mensch that he's had always wanted to be. I think you've done a fantastic job. I think also, he wasn't necessarily someone who liked children by his very nature, but the fact that, Malka in her ancient history was a nursery school teacher and dealt with education, she knew how to explain things in a very simple way, like to a 3-year-old, and there were times when that was really necessary. And I think it made a huge difference, made an extraordinary difference. The Perry of his later years showed an unequaled compassion, understanding of others. And he still sometimes blew it. He still sometimes blurted things out he didn't mean to say. And then he regretted it. And inwardly he'd be crying. And sometimes outwardly he'd also be crying. But there was always a striving then to, sometimes after a little bit of a couple of hard knocks on the side, but there was definitely a striving to be more of who he was really meant to be. And I guess I could, I don't know if this is your quote, Menachem, but Menachem said, "Laughter doesn't make light of a loss, it makes life of a loss." And as you'll hear in some of the story of his final moments and past his final moments, there were some extraordinarily unusual experiences that brought laughter in ways that were quite unexpected.
In hindsight, Perry's symptoms of ALS appeared about a year ago. We didn't notice them at first. The man who took 2 steps at a time was complaining about being tired. His speech began to slur, became short of breath, and then he lost his ability to sing. That's when I think we really noticed that things were serious. And it wasn't until the 25th of July when we visited a Dr. North, Kaiser's ALS specialist, that he confirmed the neurologist diagnosis. Dr. North was an angel when he delivered the news. He was direct, he was kind, he was gentle, he was reassuring. He explained that ALS was painless, that he came with euphoria, and he thoughtfully reassured Perry that he wouldn't lose any cognitive function. This was 5 weeks ago. He gave Dr. North gave Perry 6 months. Diane quickly visited, and we've got wonderful videos of Perry and Diane and singing Yiddish songs. I think one of them we'll sing later. And Perry, who could barely speak at the time, managed to ask that we change the lyrics of the songs. And though I don't know the Yiddish, I don't know what they mean. I know that it was a much racier version than the version that was before. Probably something he learned in his yeshiva. We found out that craffing, the combination of laughter and crying, was a real word.
Yeah. And that's bringing these two things together, the crying and the laughing in craffing. As Tamir and I were reminiscing and speaking about this whole long, extraordinary life and speaking about the contradictions and the complexities, he said, well, how do you resolve this? How do you reconcile it? How can you actually create this, would you say, almost happy ending to a life? So that Perry can look back and say, the way it began, the way it ended, it was framed, it was a good life. It wasn't incomplete. These themes are quite complex and not at all apparent at first glance. I think the most complicated aspect of Perry was that he was really angry with God. He was angry with God about the Shoah. How could a God, a righteous God, a good God, allow 6 million Jews to die? He held that as his banner. And then later in life, with the illness and death of Shalva, he was angry at God for Shalva. He was angry at God for lots of things. That was the source of the curmudgeon in him. And yet, with this illness, things were different. Things were different. I took him out maybe one of the last days where he went out just to go out, as opposed to going out to a medical appointment. And I heard him start to tell somebody, the doctors have given me 6 to 8 months to live. And it had that curmudgeon tone to it. And immediately, as he was saying it, it was as if the statistician in him did a couple of quick calculations and calculated, if I keep going with the sort of descent that I've had, which was I described as galloping, it's not going to last 6 to 8 months. So why am I saying that? 6 to 8 months? It's not going to last 6 to 8 months. And then the second calculation was, and that's probably a good thing. So there was a kind of blessing, blessed by this particular illness, that maintained his cognitive functioning, that allowed him to really laugh. How willing was he, anytime anybody made a joke, even an awful joke, how willing was he to just laugh? It was extraordinary. And he was a wonderful patient in that regard. I mean, okay, he complained here and there, but it wasn't the usual philosophical kvetch about the state of the world. It was a man who was uncomfortable now and again. But it was an extraordinary thing to see him in those last days, those last weeks, those last days, really dropping a lot of the old complaint and embracing really every moment and every person and every experience. And having some lovely laughs along the way. That's how I remember him now. As a man who showed extraordinary ability to smile in the face of hardship and to laugh as a way of reconciling unreconcilable differences.
was just over a week ago that I took a walk with Perry. At this point, he was in a wheelchair, but he had enough strength to hold my hand and to pat my arm with the other. He asked me more than once how Mimi was doing, who had just received good news after her own medical scare. We were all struggling at Perry's decline, at the speed of Perry's decline. He didn't say much at this point, but he managed to tell me a few times that he didn't expect things to be progressing so quickly. Though in the few days and hours prior to his passing, his decline had become much more gradual. A slope so gentle as to blur the line between the life in his body and his spirit life. Even so, in the moments after his passing, they were marked with a finality that takes one's breath away. The man who just weeks prior had sent us a note about his intentions to travel to Oregon to hasten and abruptly end his life. He made his transition in the most gentle and graceful manner imaginable. It was as though he chose a path to ease the trauma on us. Maybe he was just sweetly teasing us not to take the inevitable too seriously. Being with him at this time was a great gift as it softened my own fear of passing. Sunday morning was beautiful. Just after sunrise, the fog was already thin and broken in many places. Where the sun shone through, one upright of the Golden Gate Bridge glimmered. A few spots on the water glowed blue. Places in the clouds themselves shone orange and white. The fog was low, it was warm. In the still air hung mist, and it floated in eddies, often rising and falling, and had no rush to the ground. And eventually, the morticians arrived with a formality and their condolences. They wore black polyester three-piece suits. They had official-looking name badges. They were a sight out of place. They went about their duty with an earnest effort to carry on with the greatest dignity. And among their questions was Perry a veteran? And we immediately recalled the story that Perry told someone that during the Korean War he was assigned a desk job in Valley Forge Hospital in Pennsylvania. And while his service was important, he couldn't really see himself as a combat veteran. He was far too gentle and mechanically very disinclined. He poked fun of himself that he defended Pennsylvania from the North Koreans, and not a single enemy soldier had crossed the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. Even in death, Perry's jokes resonated. Perry's presence still hung with us, and we smiled inside as we knew that he would find this quite funny. And when we tried to explain this to the sincere gentleman who were resolved to maintain a professional manner above all else, we couldn't keep help from smiling outwardly. It was genuinely and unexpectedly funny.
Because these gentlemen in their three-piece suits, they didn't get the joke. and explaining it didn't make it any better. So, in the light of death, so many things that normally would be emotionally burdensome or difficult, all of a sudden seem quite different. You have an extraordinary objectivity in the light of death. And there's Perry. We had been actually hanging on his every breath for a few days. Already, it seemed like any breath was going to be his last. And Saraswati, who was there, the hospice nurse, gathered us all around, like we're all going to want to be around the bedside when he breathes his last breath. And we hung on every breath for about 4 hours, 5, longer. And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen on Friday. And it didn't happen all day Saturday. And then Sunday morning, Malka had been up with him a lot through the night. And she had just gone back to sleep at about 7 a.m. And I had just come in shortly thereafter. Well, there were these morticians. And there with their extraordinary sense of dignity and formality and how things needed to be. And they loaded Perry into the winding sheet and then got him onto the stretcher and then draped his body with an American flag. Now, something in all of us was just giggling already. But then I saw there was a blood stain on that flag. And I said, I just couldn't imagine my father lying an American flag under somebody else's blood stain. So I said, there's a stain on that flag. And the morticians were mortified. They could not believe it. And so the one of them kind of mumbled to the other, like, do you have a replacement flag? And he ran out to his bar, into his mortician's toolkit, and he brought back another one. In the meantime, with that special triangular folding that they do, it was like origami, he went, put the thing away, and he said, he had wanted to do a good job, he'd wanted to be professional, he'd wanted to make it really nice, and here he was being chided for having an unclean flag, and he felt absolutely terrible. And we started saying, well, it's just a nylon flag. It's not hard to get the stains out. Malka said something like, you should try OxyClean. So there we were, in a way, crying and laughing, but just at that moment, the laughter really overrode the crying. It was extraordinary. And then they took the body with the flag, brought it downstairs, and it was on one of those stretcher holders, and with a couple of quick little flips of the wrist, it came up to normal size, and we can prove that this happened because we had photographs taken. Not quite knowing, should we be smiling, should we be laughing, should we be crying or wailing? Does it matter? The complexities of life resolve through laughter. And what I think is extraordinary about Perry then is that if you were to ask now, what's in the glass? I think there's no doubt the glass is half. In fact, maybe it's all full as it can be, enough as a feast.
לזכרו המבורך של חברי הוותיק, to the blessed memory of my good old friend, פרץ אהרון שיינוק. עמוק עמוק בתוך הגוף, שוכן לה הנפש, איש עוד לא ראה אותה, אבל כולם יודעים שהיא קיימת. יודעים מה יש בתוכה, בתוך הנפש, במרכזה. עומדת לה על רגל אחת, ציפור ששמה ציפור הנפש, והיא מרגישה כל מה שאנחנו מרגישים. עמוק עמוק בתוך הגוף, שוכנת לה הנפש, איש עוד לא ראה אותה, אבל כולם יודעים שהיא קיימת. יודעים מה יש בתוכה, בתוך הנפש, במרכזה. עומדת לה על רגל אחת, ציפור ששמה ציפור הנפש, והיא מרגישה כל מה שאנחנו מרגישים.
Perry was a wonderful conversationalist, what they used to call a raconteur. And Rachel and I are here to represent the many fans of his pointed observations and stories. And lucky for us, he maintained a blog which contains his accounts of his family history, amazing stories, and particular descriptions of particular incidents over the years that struck a chord with him, and also his Bible commentary. The blog is called Ben Chaim because he was literally a Ben Chaim. He was the son of a man named Chaim, so it made sense. But also, I think, because he was truly a child of life in all of its complexity, the good and the bad. And the blog and every interaction with Perry seemed to show that somehow he extracted a zest from living that was amazing from all that he had gone through. So we're going to share two poems. The first is his take on a significant episode in Jewish history. It's called Crossing the Red Sea. At the Red Sea, the Israelites geared, waiting to cross the water they feared. The Egyptians were very close, scaring them from nose to toes. Moses called on the chief engineer, "Think and don't be a victim of fear." He responded, "We need a giant blower. It needs to behave like a water mower. We need to get one in a big hurry. Our survival is my greatest worry. I really have a clever notion how to traverse this tiny ocean. We draft all the politicians in our group and let them exhale until they droop. That will blow all the waters away, and we can cross easily and not stray. Then we make them all strongly inhale. The waters will return and cover our trail. We'll be singing and dancing after our escape. Just make sure we get it all on videotape."
And in listening to Diane actually share this story towards the end of Perry's life of making mental calculus about everything, I sort of had this flash that he sort of has created a field called existential mathematics. And this particular piece is actually a really good example of the power that animated his mind. It's called the Gregorian calendar. In 1582, Pope Gregory declared a change in the Julian calendar previously prepared. Leap years were proposed by Lilius and Aloysius in a calculation which became more auspicious. The world accepted it after a substantial period, although it was not loved by too great a myriad. Think about it, and you will see the reason. The extra day occurs in the wrong season. Why add a day during wintertime when our world is full of snow, mud, and slime? If it had been added to the month of June, summertime would not have ended so soon.
Life in Pripyat, burnt a fire on his face. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder dem alle Beis. Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder dem alle Beis. Sogje kinderlach, gedenk shetayere, Ojilento. Sogje noch amol, und take noch amol, kom zalefo. Sogje noch amol, und take noch amol, kom zalefo.
Despite the truth of what crafting means, it also does involve some crying. We have lost a lot. We'll find a way to sing while crying, but we're going to be doing some crying. This room that you're in is a very, very holy space. Many things make it holy. Mostly the people who call it home and build it with their presence. It's also holy because Shalva was here. It's holier now because Perry's here. Many people have touched this space with their presence and with the very painful gift of our saying goodbye here. Months ago and years ago, Perry stood right there, leading mincha at two beautiful bnot mitzvah. And now his family again graces us in their pain, and with a lot of humor through their pain, not despite it. And so we'll figure out when to start crying and when to start laughing, or we'll just figure out because it's already happening. But in those moments where Perry was leading, he was leading mincha. The beginning of the mincha, the afternoon service, starts with Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha. Happy are those who sit or who dwell in your home. I'm pretty sure that Perry wasn't particularly happy addressing God. There were sources of happiness that led to the moment of saying Ashrei. I actually fear for God because Perry's analysis is going to be too much for God now. And so I wish he were standing here, leading mincha in a very conflicted, passionate, melodic way. So what I think we're going to do is sit here with him right now in our conflicted, passionate, quiet, melodic ways. So before I begin the El Malay, which is a prayer for memory, asking God to hold Perry and hold on for dear life because it's Perry. I'd like us to take a moment of actually sitting, thinking exactly what we're actually thinking. It can be funny. It can be tortured. It can be confused. It can be sad and blessed all at the same time. But if we don't offer all of that honesty, then the cup has nothing filling it. So this cup has to be overflowing. In Psalm 23 I said, my cup overflows. That's only true if you give what you've got in you. So in testimony to Perry, I'll ask each of us just for a moment to pour out through our hearts precisely what it is that we bring right now, sitting in this space. So take a moment, please. Just let it out. There's never going to be a vessel strong enough to hold everything that we're offering. So we'll just have to find ways of holding each other and being the vessels. Allowing the laughter. Not erasing the tears either. Just have one more thing to share before we continue with the El Malay, which is that having come to know Perry in these last 7 years, There have been many moments where he asks me questions he'd never thought that I was going to be able to answer. And what I pray we each live up to is never pretending that we could. There are a whole lot more questions that Perry would have us continue to ask than any answers to any questions anybody's going to ask. And yet, despite all of those questions that swirled in his soul every second, toward the end, there was one expression that he would offer over and over and over. And we're better at offering care, and by we I mean Malka, than we are at receiving it. He had a habit that she made him stop, which was to thank her. So not saying that now would also be something Perry would be mad at me for doing. I'm going to recite the El Malay, after which I'm going to ask those who have been asked to be pallbearers to come forward, as will accompany Perry toward Briones, toward Gan Shalom. Everyone is welcome to be part of the burial itself, which will take place there. After that, people are welcome to come back to Malki's home for Sudat Havara, just being together, breathing. And then Shiva will take place tonight, and Wednesday night, and Thursday night at 7:30, and Thursday night at 7:30 in the evening. During Shabbat, we don't observe Shiva, so people are welcome if you'd like to be part of Shul davening that happens as part of Shabbat, 9:30 Saturday morning. Saturday night there'll be a minyan at 9 o'clock at Malka's home, and Sunday night at 7:30. If you need any of that information again, please just call our office. It's hard to be all the things that we are in this moment. So please see these rituals not as any suggested emotional state. I'll ask us to rise in body or spirit as we recite the El Malay. El Malay Rachamim Shochein Bamromi Hamatzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'malot Kedoshim U'Teorim Kezohar Harakia Mazkirim Et Nishmat Eretz Aharon Ben Chaim V'Sara Shalach Leolamo B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Bal Harachamim Hasirehu B'Seter Knafecha Leolamim Utzror Mitzor HaChaim Et Nishmato Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar, Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the soul of Peretz Aharon ben Chaim Sarah, our friend Perry, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of Chaim, of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I'll ask the pallbearers to come forward, please.
Yedid nefesh in of harachaman mishoch avdecha el rtzonecha משוח עבדך אל רצונך, ירוץ עבדך כמו אייל, ישתחווה אל מול הדרך, ונרף לו ידידותיך, ונרף לו ידידותיך, ונרף לו ידידותיך, מנופס צוף בכל טוב. הדור נאה זיף העולם, זיף העולם, נפשי חולת אהבתך. אנא אלנה רפאנה לה, רפאנה לה, בהרות לנו זיבך, עוז תתחזק ותתרפא, עוז תתחזק ותתרפא, והייתה לה שמחת עולם, והייתה לה שמחת עולם, והייתה לה שמחת עולם. ותיק ימינו רחמך, ימינו רחמך, וחוסנה על בין אהובך. ותיק ימינו רחמך, ותיק ימינו רחמך, וחוסנה על בין אהובך. כי זה כמה נחשפתי לראות בהרה בתפארת עזך. אלה חמדה ליבי בחוסנה, ואל תתעלם בחוסנה, ואל תתעלם בחוסנה, ואל תתעלם. היגלנה פרוס ופרוס, חביבי עלי את סוכת שלומך. תאיר ארץ מכבודך, תאיר ארץ מכבודך, נהגילה ונשבחה בך, מהר אהוב כי במועד, מהר אהוב כי במועד, וחננו כימי עולם, וחננו כימי עולם.